pals, I'm here today to do a TBR for the year of 2022. So, the last few years I've been really rubbish at picking fantasy books up, and part of the reason for that is that I'm someone who, when I find a fantasy book I enjoy, I get so much happiness out of it and I just love it. But the majority of fantasy books I try, I think, are pretty shit. So it's sort of sad that in the genre where I can absolutely love them, the majority of them I actually really dislike. And so it makes me try less books, and to be honest, last year I did try quite a few of the sort of buzzy new releases and DNF'd like pretty much all of them. So yeah, so I had as an aside two videos I've been considering doing for a while. One is talking about all the sort of popular, well-known fantasy books or series that I've tried and why I've DNF'd them, so let me know if you're interested in that. And another is doing a video about all the sort of tropes that I don't like in fantasy, and some of the tropes that do work for me, so let me know. Or that's something that perhaps could be applied to just like wider reading and doesn't even have to be fantasy specific, but there's a couple of things that I'd mentioned within that video that only tend to come up in fantasy. So yeah, let me know if any of those videos sound interesting. So I've got 12 books. They are all the first book in a series that is pretty common in fantasy. There's not many standalones. The first one I've pretty much put on this list because I like the cover and it's written by a female author. Fantasy is still, like, even today in 2022, really dominated by white men, and so I try and, you know, go for other writers, and that's something I can talk about in the trope video. There is lots of reasons for that. I think, text message, I think a lot of male fantasy authors are the worst for sticking to some of the most offensive tropes that the fantasy genre tend to write about. So the first one is The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. Now this one, in cover and title and, dare I say, plot, sounds quite similar to the Live Ship Traders trilogy by Robin Hobb, which I love and adore. Yeah, and the blurb, to be honest, doesn't really tell you anything about the characters, which is perhaps an issue for me because I'm a very character-based fantasy reader. But it says, there's two nations at war and a prize beyond compare. For generations, the 100 Isles have built their ships from the bones of ancient dragons to fight an endless war. The dragons disappeared, but the battles for supremacy persisted. Now the first dragons in centuries has been spotted in far-off waters, and both sides see a chance to shift the balance of power in their favour. And I guess you're watching these two opposing sides as they try to get to this dragon. Just as a little spoiler, one of the things I'm really not a fan of in fantasy is dragons, which I know is a very unpopular opinion. I just find them a bit smug and arrogant and annoying. So yeah, hoping that they're not like a massive part of the story in terms of their character, and it's more about the people trying to get to these dragons. But yeah, this has got pretty good reviews. It's being described as a fairly slow-paced series, which is something I enjoy, so that is the first one on my list. The next one is a new release from last year. I have quite a few of those, and that is the Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. I think this is her first, well, it's a weird one because I read Empire of Sand, and I think people debate whether that is a YA or an adult fantasy. It sort of bridges the gap, really. I enjoyed it. I liked the pacing and the character development, but there was just elements of that didn't work for me. But I enjoyed it enough to be interested in what she was going to bring out in future. So when I heard she had a sort of chunkier adult book coming out, I was interested. I think this may have a female-female romance, which is something that I will very much enjoy. And I think this one is about a princess and her maidservant. And the princess's brother is like going to rule the kingdom and he's like awful. And I think he imprisons her, and it's about her and her maidservant trying to flee and then make this treacherous journey across this land. And this is inspired by the history and epics of India. So something I did enjoy in the book of hers I read was that it's sort of desert-based fantasy. I think she did that really well, and that's something that I haven't read as much of as like medieval type England fantasy, which is like what the majority of the genre is. So yeah, fingers crossed this one is a good one. The next one has been out for quite a few years actually. When did it come out? 2018. And I was interested in it since it came out because it's by Chris Wooding, and that is the Ember Blade. It's the first book in the Darkwater Legacy. I'm not sure if the series has been completed yet, but I used to read Chris Wooding's books when I was a sort of young adult, I guess, in the early 2000s, and I really enjoyed them. And then quite a few years ago now, I read his Ketty J series, which I enjoyed. I think if I read it now, I wouldn't enjoy because it was probably a bit fast paced. But because I sort of liked him as a very young reader, I have this sort of nostalgia for his writing style. It sounds like very stereotypical fantasy. I think we're following a young boy who like perhaps might be the chosen one. There's some sort of quest. So yeah, I'm pretty much picking this one up because it's Chris Wooding and I've previously liked what he has done. So, and I've heard a couple of people who like similar fantasy to me say that they enjoyed this one. Then I have two books which I've heard Chris over at the channel, Chris's Bookish Cauldron, absolutely rave about. I think I have quite similar taste in reading as Chris. We both read a lot of literary fiction but also enjoy lots of sort of epic fantasy, and I heard him rave about these two series last year. I'll link his reviews down below. And so yeah, I'm not going to explain what either of these are about in lots of detail because I think they're fairly complex fantasy series, but I definitely want to pick both of them up. And the first one is Rules of Ascension by David B. Coe. I mean, what a cover. I know some people really like these sort of 80s or 90s vibe mass market paperbacks for fantasy. I really don't like them. I think they're awful. I much prefer when these sort of books are like republished now. But yeah, it's very reminiscent of the time. I think this actually came out in 2002, so that's quite a sort of dated cover even for them. But I think this has a fairly complex magic system and maybe a few different races and some hierarchies within those races. So yeah, and Chris just absolutely raved about it, so that's why that's on my list. And the next one, and I prefer this cover, is The One Kingdom by Sean Russell. I think Sean Russell is still writing fantasy now. He's got a new series coming out, but I want to stick with this one because this is the one I heard Chris rave about. I really like all the covers. They're quite sort of seasonally themed. And yeah, if I enjoy this, then it'll be exciting to read his new series as it comes out. And yeah, again, it sounds pretty complex, a very long blurb about lots of sort of different people, and I think royal families perhaps. So yeah, fingers crossed I enjoy this one as well. Then one I've heard Sabrina talk about, and again, Sabrina's someone who I think reads fairly similar books to me, and I heard her rave about Jade City, and then I think she's actually read the whole trilogy and really enjoyed the whole trilogy by Fonda. And so as soon as I heard her rave about it earlier last year, I got it out from the library and I read the first 2 chapters and I sort of liked it, but I had loads of books out from the library, I had loads of books I wanted to finish, and in order to like want to carry on with a book from the library at that point, it needed to be like a 4 or 5 star read, and it just wasn't. It felt like maybe a 3. And something that put me off it, so this is an Asian inspired fantasy that is like sort of like gangster themed, I guess, and these different gangs have a sort of magical power that they're trying to, that is used as like an economy system, I think. I mean, I'm probably describing this really badly. This is a beloved urban fantasy series. I haven't read a lot of urban fantasy, and I think it doesn't pull me in as much as more, I guess, like rural based fantasy. Like, I'm someone who very much enjoys fantasy where they're like travelling through lots of regions and stuff. I love that sort of quest trope. And yeah, just in those first couple of chapters, there's just a lot of very male characters. And when I looked up a lot of reviews, people said that it's pretty weak on the female characters until later in the series, and that was a reason I decided to put it down. But I then saw Sabrina talk about it in her favourite books of the year, the trilogy, and I had a couple of other people who, opinions I trust, also put it in their favourite books of last year and said that the like final book in the trilogy was phenomenal. So I've been drawn back in, okay? So I only read like 30 pages, so I was a bit harsh. So I'm going to try again and hope to fall in love with this series, because absolutely, what I want to happen with some of these is I want to love them so much, I like have to have the next one and I just binge them. Because when I love a series, I won't read anything else, I'll just binge it, and that hasn't happened in like so long. Okay, I've got 2 more like really popular books that I've heard loads of people rave about. One being The City of Brass, which is the first book in the Devabad trilogy, I think that's how you say it, by S.A. Chakraborty. I've heard people rave about this in both audio and print form, and again, it is I think it's a finished series. I think they're all out, correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I'm pretty sure they're all out, so I'm hoping to like really enjoy this one and then want to binge it, like I said. In this one we follow a female character, which is something I very much am always looking for in fantasy. This is set in 18th century Cairo. Oh, I didn't realise it was set in like Okay, so I think it might have a blend of like real places and maybe mythical, I'm not sure. And she's a con woman and she accidentally summons a djinn, and it like follows this adventure she has to go on, and travelling to, I think, Bedford, which I think is a place. And yeah, I've just heard so many people, especially a lot of people who don't tend to read much fantasy, absolutely rave about this series. I've heard some mixed reviews from people saying that it leans a bit more to the YA side and therefore like isn't enjoyed as much by readers of adult epic fantasy, but I'm willing to give it a go because, like I said, I've just heard really good things. And again, I've read a lot of like medieval England type fantasy, so I'm always looking for fantasy that is inspired by other parts of the world. Then the next book is Black Sun by Roanhorse. Now, I think this sounds pretty sci-fi to me, but it has been put on both sci-fi and fantasy shelves on Goodreads, like really high on both. So I'm going to include it in this list, and it's certainly one I'm interested in. When I read through the blurb, it does really sound like sci-fi. So it starts in this holy city, there's a winter solstice, but at the same time as that there's a solar eclipse, which is a rare celestial event prescribed by the sun priest as an unbalancing of the world. And we're following a woman who is travelling on a ship. It just says a ship launches from a distant city, but like, I don't know why, but I read that as spaceship. Maybe it isn't. I mean, let me know down below if you read this book. And on that ship she has a captive, and she's told he's harmless, and it says, but as we well know, those who are harmless usually end up being the villain. So yeah, I'm hoping this can be quite a character focused one, like a close focus on one or two characters, which is something I enjoy. And I don't really know what I'm getting myself in for, like if this is going to be more sci-fi than fantasy, but I've heard really good things. And when I was looking to see if anyone I watched had reviewed this one, I saw that Rincey over at Rincey Reads had given this one a really positive review, and what she had to say really sort of encouraged me to add the book to this list, so I will link her video down below. Then other than the Chris Wooding, I think this is the only book on the list by an author I've previously read. And that is The Dark Mirror, which is the first book in the Bride Chronicles by Juliet Marillier. So I have read all of the Seven Waters books, the Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy, and I'm now nearly finished with the, what are they called? Well, the first book is the Half of Kings, and they're a trilogy. I've nearly finished with the Warrior Bard trilogy. I've nearly finished that, and I will try and read the last book in the next few weeks. So I had a look, and she has, I think, 2 other adult series, and then 2 or 3 YA series, and then lots of standalones that I haven't read. But I decided to go for The Dark Mirror because this is the last adult fantasy she has that is set in like Ireland. I think the other one she has is maybe Norse based, which I'm not sure if I'll enjoy that as much, but I am intrigued to see what she does with that sort of world. But this follows a young nobleman, which I'm not used to because in all of her books they've either been told from a woman's perspective or there's been 2 perspectives, one being a woman and one being a man. So I think this will be quite interesting, although I think the perspective changes in each book in the series, which is something I actually enjoy in fantasy series. So this young nobleman is being fostered by one of the most powerful druids in the land, and like that's all going well, and then a young baby turns up on their doorstep on Midwinter's Eve, a little baby girl, and the people think she's been left there by the fair folk, which means like fairies who they don't trust. They think she's a changeling, and they don't want to look after her, but he decides to take her in, and you sort of follow his story from there, and I think the little baby girl story. And that sounds pretty slow and plotless, which is something I really like about Juliet Marillier, so I'm very much looking forward to that one. Then I have another new release from last year, which I think is another queer female fantasy, which I've heard amazing things about. So we follow 2 female characters. One is a soldier, and she was stolen as a child and raised to kill and die for the Empire. And then the other is the niece of the king, who's on the throne, and she wants to bring about peace, and so she's trying to find a turncoat. But Touraine, who is the soldier, is really loyal, but it's about how their paths cross and like what happens from there. So yeah, I've heard really good things about this. I've heard that it's super slow, and I think it was maybe sold as being a more fast-paced book. Lots of people picked it up expecting a super quick page turning read and it's more of a character study, but that is something I really enjoy, and so I'm hoping this is a good one. And then the last two are both by female authors again, and neither of these are out yet, so these are two that are coming out early on in 2022 that I thought sounded really interesting. The first one being the Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. This is inspired by the stories from 1001 Nights, which puts me off a little bit because obviously if you've ever heard of 1001 Nights, which I'm sure you have, or looked into it, it's lots of small stories that are collected together, and I hope it isn't structured like that because I would much prefer a more solid through narrative. But the way it's described, it sounds like it is. So we follow this young woman who is a sort of legendary smuggler. She sells illegal magic, but she saves the life of a cowardly prince and draws the attention of his powerful father, the Sultan, who blackmails her into finding an ancient lamp that has the power to revive the barren land at the cost of sacrificing all jinn. And she has a jinn bodyguard, and so her and this prince go on this quest to find this lamp, but then I think it's about like what happens along the way, so sounds very interesting. And then the last one is the Amber Crown by Jacey Bedford. So this is told from three perspectives. It's something I really enjoy in fantasy when we have multiple perspectives. So it says the king is dead, his queen is missing, and on the Amber Coast the usurper king is driving Zavonia to the brink of war. And we follow a captain of the High Guard who has been accused of the king's murder and he's on the run. We follow a healer witch of a landstrider band, valued and feared in equal measure for her witch mark, her scalding tongue and her ability to walk the spirit world. She interests me the most. And then a clever assassin who is, someone paid him to kill the king, but he's now trying to find out like who is behind it and like look into all of that. And somehow these three come together and are trying to discover who the real villain was and who actually killed the king. So yeah, I really like the sound of that one. So those are the 12 fantasy books I have on my TBR for 2022. Have you read any of these? Do you think I'll enjoy them? Based on the fact that, like I said, I enjoy reading fantasy books that are slow-paced, character-focused, and actually have female characters that aren't just the whore, the virgin, and the one who gets raped. So yeah, let me know if you think any of those books will fulfill those categories. I hope so, and if you have any other recommendations for books that do as well. And like I said, let me know if you're interested in those videos I mentioned earlier on in the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!